Hey everyone, welcome to the November 23rd edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski, and this week we're going to make it into somewhat of a hybrid podcast because we're not going to do a forecast later in the week. It's Thanksgiving. A lot of people are going to be busy later in the week, either with family or holiday festivities, so we're not going to do one on Friday, but we are going to do some handicapping on this TimeformUS Pacecast today and kind of split up the show. We'll do a brief recap of some races from last week. Frankly, there's just not a whole lot to recap because it just wasn't a great week in racing last week. Only a couple of graded stakes to talk about, not that many high speed figures. So after that recap is done, we'll transition into a little bit of handicapping, and we're going to talk about the late pick 4 sequence on Friday at Churchill Downs. That Friday card in Louisville, it features the grade 1 Clark, race 11 of 12. So we'll talk about that and the races before and preceding it, talk about how to play that sequence and strategy because it is an interesting set of races, and the Clark has drawn a really nice field, some good horses signed on there. So Craig, we're going to start things off with the recap, and as I was kind of saying at the start, just not a lot of top level racing this past week.
No, there sure wasn't. Only a couple of graded stakes. I think most of the tracks like to save them for what's become a pretty big Thanksgiving weekend. Few on Thursday at a few tracks, but really Friday, Saturday are some big racing days around the country.
Craig, I think that we have earned the right to start it off, to give ourselves a bit of a pat on the back because we did pretty well in the TimeformUS forecast last week. I know some listeners who played the ticket in the fashion that we were suggesting, reached out, said that they hit it. I know that you had a good ticket that you put together and were able to make a score. And I just think we gave out some pretty good opinions, and we were able to navigate a pretty tough sequence the right way.
Yeah, it all worked out. And sometimes I think personally that's how I lean towards playing those kind of sequences. Don't go crazy spending hundreds of dollars. And when you're right, get rewarded. You just have to learn to live with. You're not going to hit a lot of them. And I think that's actually the first one we could clearly say that, yeah, we basically gave out the pick 5. It was kind of hard not to have it with our opinions there. We're going to miss a lot, but I think both of us are the kind of players that when we hit it's not going to pay $400 or something like that. It's going to be a nice one.
Yeah, and we had said it going in. If that was the kind of sequence that if you were able to put together a winning ticket, you were going to get rewarded handsomely because it just seemed like it had to play out that way. There were so many competitive races, so many races that looked kind of chaotic going in, and maybe even some races that people didn't think looked chaotic at first glance that you could make a case for some horses at bigger prices. And I think that's what both of us did, especially in those two-year-old races where you highlighted Life is Great, who paid $33 to win the 7th race, and I had some positive things to say about Unique Unions in the last race, who paid $26. I mean, they were kind of the keys to getting through that sequence, horses that might not have looked that obvious on all of the metrics, all the speed figures, but there were some positive things to like about them. So if you listened to the forecast last week, hopefully you made a score in that sequence. And Craig, we should talk about the feature race on that Aqueduct card, the grade 2 Red Smith. Really one of the top performances of last week, Serve the King winning that race by a neck over Channel Cat. I thought that all of the top 3 finishers ran really well in this race. I think each of them got decent trips, and Serve the King, he's just a horse that seems to keep improving with every start.
Yeah, he's kind of the horse you said. He's more of a grinder who's really improved at these extended distances. He ran a 121 TimeformUS speed figure here. Got a solid enough pace. The fractions are a little bit tricky because the course wasn't all that quick. But yeah, it's just a good effort from him. He's always going to be dangerous in these grade 2, grade 3 types going these long distances. Channel Cat showed he's not finished yet, ran a really nice race. He actually gets a 122 speed figure. Just a little bit of an aside, he said what we have is a little bit quicker than average pace in here. But that's something I mentioned last week or the week before that we're going to modify how I do these ratings a little bit. And this is one, too, where speed horses on the turf, you're not going to see this very often where they're going to finish with a better figure than the winner because it just doesn't add a lot of value anymore. There was a time where it did, but with the way the game has changed and the way a lot of these turf courses play, it's just not worth rewarding them as much as we do.
Yeah, I saw some people saying that the third place finisher, Soldier Rising, was a little bit unlucky here. He was the one that was making the last move coming from the tail end of the field to get up for third. I rewatched the race trying to find trouble that this horse had. Personally, I thought he got a pretty good trip from Jose Ortiz. I mean, he was far back the entire way, but he was saving ground around all the turns. He didn't tip out until they got into the stretch, and I don't know. Personally, it never looked like he was getting there. He wasn't really gaining ground on Serve the King at the end of the race. But still, he's a 3-year-old who ran a third place finish against older horses at the end of the season, going a marathon distance. We don't always see that with the younger horses. So I still think he's a promising horse for next season.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, of the horses in the field, it would look like grade 2, grade 3 types, except maybe him, because turf horses seem to come around a little later. It takes them a little longer to mature, unlike the dirt horses who can compete against their elders earlier in their career for the most part. So going forward, he's probably the most promising of the group.
Yeah, and as you were kind of pointing out, Channel Cat did set an honest pace in this race. It's not like he was just walking on the front end. I think if he had been, he probably would have held off Serve the King because he's a pretty game horse. He likes to dig in and fight. He just got run down on the wire by the superior animal on this day. Craig, we should also talk about one more race from Aqueduct on Friday's card, another race that earned a speed figure in the low 120s. That was an allowance race won by the Chad Brown-trained L'Imperator, a horse that they had gotten a little bit ambitious with running in some stakes when he first got in this country. Also have had some trouble keeping him on the racetrack, but seemed like the drop in class really did the trick for him here.
Yeah, he kind of put it all together. He ran his best speed figure that we've seen in this country, or right at it. He matched it with a 120. So nice effort from him, and I would imagine he would try some stakes again soon. I like the way he was able to really finish this race off, and like he won by almost 3 lengths, and we've talked about how that is much better than it would look on dirt. You don't often see that on turf. So sometimes a drop in class, get that confidence up and put him back in, and maybe he'd be able to run better in stakes.
Yeah, and I just looked it up. He was in for the $80,000 claiming tag in this race. He had to be eligible for that tag to run here. He was not claimed, though, so he's still with Chad Brown, the only horse that was claimed out of this race, and quite a few of them were up for the tag. Was the second place finisher Temple, who was actually claimed back by his former connections, Mike Maker and Paradise Farm Corporation, so he's now back with Mike Maker moving forward. But L'Imperator, he was a dominant winner, and I agree, Craig. It looked like maybe his form had been tailing off, but maybe sometimes these horses, when they get older, they just need a confidence booster, and maybe he'll head back in the right direction after this. Another race that we should mention is one from Kentucky. The feature race at Churchill Downs last Saturday was the Grade 3 Chiluki, an obligatory, a horse that I think some of us were a little bit disappointed by in her last couple starts. She failed to get involved in the test, was disappointing in the Raven run, but she came back here and got to the winner's circle in pretty impressive fashion, just better than the horses she was facing in this spot.
Yeah, she fooled me on this day because I just couldn't find an excuse for her last race. And who knows? Sometimes they're living, breathing animals, and maybe something was wrong. You just don't know. She just didn't run that day, but she sure rebounded nicely. She liked the 1-turn mile. And it wasn't like she got a crazy fast setup. The pace was honest, but it wasn't anything nuts on the pace figures. And she just exploded home. So big effort from her. I would imagine we're going to keep seeing her in these 1-turn type extended 1-turn races where she's always going to be dangerous.
Yeah, watching this race, it just looked like Joel Rosario rode her with a ton of confidence. He was unbothered by the fact that she just kind of walked into stride early. She's never a horse that gets too involved in the early part of a race, but you could tell she was just loping along at the back of the pack, and once he asked her for even a little bit of run in upper stretch, she just inhaled that field. He geared her down at the end, so definitely a horse that won this race the right way. Like I was saying, she was not facing the toughest competition here. It really was a grade 3 field at best, but she earned a respectable speed figure, the highest of her career so far, so she is one that might be heading in the right direction at the end of her 3-year-old season, and that typically is the time that we start to see these horses hit their peaks. Craig, the only other race that I think is worth mentioning from last week was the other graded stakes that was run out in California. Del Mar, the grade 3 native diver, but just not a ton of depth to this race. Only 6 horses ran. 3 of them were from the Bob Baffert stable. 8 Rings was bet down to even money. He disappointed. The Bob Baffert second choice, Azul Coast, got the job done, but I don't think anybody's ever considered him to be in the upper echelon of the handicap division. Just not the fastest race.
No, the speed figure kind of told the story with this one. I didn't even review this card. My assistant did it, and I didn't even see the speed figure until you mentioned the race. It was only a 112, which for grade 3 older males is just really, really weak. So I'm not going to put a lot of stock in this race. 8 rings, I guess you could give him an excuse because he was coming back so quick off a pretty big effort in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. But the rest of them, they're just grade 3 allowance type horses, in my opinion.
Well, let's transition now and move into the second portion of this podcast, the TimeformUS forecast portion, where we talk about the sequence on Friday's card at Churchill Downs. The future race there, as I said at the top of the show, is the Grade 1 Clark, going 1 1/8 on the dirt. This entire sequence at Churchill, of course, is all dirt, with them only running on the main track at this current meet. We're going to talk about races 9 through 12, which comprise that Pick 4 sequence, and Craig will kick things off with that 9th race. It's an optional claiming 62,000. Nominators are 2 other than going 1 3/16 on the main track at Churchill. And Craig, as we get into this sequence and talking about it and the contenders and strategy, I'm going to say right off the bat, I think this is one where you've got 2 races that bookend this sequence, the 9th and the 12th, that look highly competitive. You've got 2 races in the middle that I would say have some solid looking favorites. We'll get to that in a little bit. Maybe you have a difference of opinion about that. But I think the key in many ways for this sequence for me is navigating the first and the last legs, because this race, the 9th that kicks it off, is ultra competitive.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree with your overall take as well. I think the 2 where you're going to want a little more coverage are probably this one and the last one. But yeah, this one's a bit interesting for me. It didn't draw a big field compared to some of the other races. Only 8 horses are entered. The pace projector has it as a slow pace, and I do think we have some kind of filler in here in horses who are turf horses who are just looking for somewhere to run because the turf course is being redone, and there's a good chance they wouldn't even be on the turf anymore anyway at this point in the year, but maybe they still would be. But anyway, for me, I'm going to eliminate a couple of those because I don't ever really want to bet those kind in straight dirt races where they have to beat some other dirt horses. I guess the horse you have to start with is the Ledge, because on our pace projector, he's shown as having a clear early lead. It is at that extended distance of 1 3/16, but he's a horse who's ran 1 1/4 his last couple times out. But I'll be honest, I'm assuming he's going to be one of the favorites. As of this recording, we don't have a morning line or program numbers or anything like that. But I got to say, I don't really love him in this spot. I just think he's okay, and I'll be looking to spread for sure. I think one of the horses, before I'll turn it back to you, that I definitely want to use is a horse who's coming off a long layoff for trainer Jonathan Thomas. He's showing up as a first-time gelding, and that's Patagonia, drawn into the 3-post position. He's a horse who has shown a lot of promise in his career. He's never been out of the exacta. And he's one that I think actually has a big shot. He's got a long string of works. He has figures that are competitive in here. Jonathan Thomas is great off the layoff, and I think this one might offer a little bit of a price, so he would be an A for me.
Yeah, this is a really tricky race for me, and as I handicapped the sequence, I kind of came back to it multiple times, because for me, it really is the key to this sequence being right in this first leg, or just finding some interesting price horses that are going to make this sequence worth playing, because I don't want to just focus on the favorites like a Ledge. I don't want to lean on him too heavily and then perhaps catch favorites in the next 2 legs and then, hope for a long shot in the last leg. I don't think that's necessarily the right way to play this sequence. And I'm glad to hear that you are a little skeptical of a Ledge as well, Craig, because I get that at first glance he looks like the logical favorite in this race, a formidable horse who has competitive speed figures, arguably the best speed figures in this field. The TimeformUS Pace Projector says that he's going to be ultra tough on the lead, but it's not like he's a horse that's ever had the lead in the past, so who knows if that's the running style that he really prefers. And even though he's gotten some nice speed figures in his last couple of races, I just have not been blown away by those races. He was no match for Colonel's Dark Temper 2 back. I thought Bo Luminari, the third place finisher, actually ran better than Alleged in that race, and he did come back to win out of that race. And I mean, what was Alleged's excuse last time? I mean, he was stalking a moderate pace, and he just had nothing left. I know that the winner came from last place, and Alleged got a little bit bumped in the stretch, but it was nothing significant. Other horses had far worse trouble in there. I'm just not thrilled with him at what's likely to be a short price. And Craig, I also have similar questions about the horse that you highlighted, Patagonia, who I think could be the second choice in this race. I'm a little bit skeptical of this horse coming off the layoff. I mean, I was never sure how good he was to begin with. He did run some nice speed figures to start off his career, but I remember his last race that he ran at Aqueduct in March of 2020, which was a long time ago, before even the pandemic started. It was just a really weird performance. He was up stalking the pace early, and he just started dropping back under Eric Cancel, frankly, like he was about to be eased. I mean, the horse was just going nowhere. Cancel was motivating him, and it looked like maybe he had, like, something was going wrong with the horse. He dropped all the way back to last. Cancel, to his credit, kept persevering with the horse, and all of a sudden, he switches them to the outside, and he makes this huge stretch run to get up for second. It was just a really bizarre race. I guess something did go wrong because we haven't seen him, obviously, for over a year and a half since then. Jonathan Thomas has great numbers off layoffs in general, but it's kind of dichotomous between turf and dirt. If you look in Formulator and just look at his numbers off layoffs, especially in dirt or in dirt routes specifically, they're pretty poor. It's not a huge sample, but I think he's just like 1 for 13 or something like that. And Patagonia has been working in company in the mornings with Nicky the Vest, who just came back off a similarly long layoff at Aqueduct last week and was extremely disappointing as the heavy favorite. And Nicky the Vest was actually out working Patagonia in those works. So I have some questions about this horse, and I wanted to go in a different direction. A horse that I think is really dangerous in here, Craig, is the number 1, 20 Twice. And I want to get your take on him. I know we had discussed him a little bit a few weeks ago when we were handicapping that Keeneland sequence on October 23rd. And Bo Luminari, who neither of us were a big fan of, won that race. But Bo Luminari is a pretty good horse. And I think we both kind of agreed that maybe the mile and 16th was a little bit short for 20 Twice. And now he's getting to stretch back out again. We'll see how much pace develops in this race because he is a deep closer. But he just seems like one of these Jack Sisterson horses that might be getting better at the right time.
Yeah, he's definitely on my list of horses to use for sure. I don't think he had much chance last time. As you said, it was probably too short for him. In addition, the pace just wasn't much. Even though Bo Luminari was able to come from a little bit closer up than what he was, he is more of a sprinter type with at least sprinter type speed. I don't think the slow pace would bother him near as much as a horse like 20 Twice, who's more of a plotter, and I think the mile and 3/16 is really going to prove to be good for him. So, yeah, he would be the other horse. He's probably more of a B, but it depends. You may have steered me a little bit off of Patagonia, at least as strongly as I was. Yeah, definitely a tough race, and one I'm going to use some other horses. I would use Alleged more as like a C horse, mainly because of I just really questioned that he wants to go this far. I know he broke his maiden at 1.25 miles, but that was in a race without a lot of pace. So when the pace is slow, it kind of makes the distance really shorter than what's listed in some of these races. And I just haven't liked how he's looked in the stretch in his last couple. So he'd need every bit of that pace advantage that the pace projector thinks he's going to have to contend here. Curious how you see some of the horses who have been running on turf. Farmington Road, to me, he does have some decent back races, so of those, he'd be the one I might include as like a C-type horse.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of other horses in this race that I would want to use because I was kind of getting at this, but I'll just state it plainly. If I'm playing the sequence, I'm not using Alleged and I'm not using Patagonia at all. I just think the key to getting a decent payout for me in this sequence, knowing where I'm going in the subsequent races, is to chuck the favorites in this first leg and really focus on the horses that I think are interesting at prices. 20 Twice, I don't know how big of a price he's going to be, but he'd be the one that I think is the most likely winner among the rest of the horses. So maybe I'll press him a little bit more heavily. But there are others in here that I want to use. Craig, Farmington Road, he'd be one of them. don't totally trust him. His recent form has been spotty, but I'm not convinced that he ever was much better on turf than he is on dirt. I mean, his only recent dirt race was going 1 mile and 5/8 in the Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance. I mean, what's to say that he's a horse that wants to go that far? So I think if he gets back to his prior dirt races for Todd Pletcher, I mean, he's pretty interesting in here. And I mean, the horses that are drawn towards the outside as well, some of those other turf horses that you were alluding to, the number 7 goalie, I think, is a little bit interesting. I mean, Robertino Diodoro is a trainer who runs his horses all over the place. I mean, I don't think he necessarily has to run this turf horse in this dirt race at Churchill Downs. And this one does have plenty of pedigree to handle the dirt. He's by Bodemeister. He's actually a half-brother to Midnight Storm, who was a horse that was equally talented on both dirt and turf. I believe he won graded stakes on both of those surfaces going longer. And I know that goalie has only run on turf in his career. The Connections have never tried dirt with him. But that last race at Keeneland going 5.5, that just feels like it was a prep. Diodoro has good turf to dirt statistics, and this one has trained pretty well in the dirt throughout his career. I just think he's a little bit interesting and a horse that probably is going to be a price in here for a barn that wins at a pretty high rate, especially right now at Churchill Downs. So I do want to use goalie. And another ridiculous horse that I want to just mention and throw into the mix is the number 8 Ironstone Road. He might look totally overmatched to you on paper. I get that his speed figures coming in are a little bit lower, but he's a new face in this race and in a spot where, frankly, I'm just not that thrilled with a lot of the familiar horses are going to take money. And this one coming in from, I think, Belterra Park, he ran well at Ellis over the summer. That allowance race that he won 2 back, if you go back and watch that race, I thought he was pretty game to get the job done, altering course multiple times in mid-stretch. Only got a 99 TimeformUS speed figure for that performance, but it's not like it's that far off some of the top contenders in this race, and he's a very lightly raced horse who's been improving with every start. I don't think he's a turf horse, so I like him getting back on the dirt. And this barn, while it might not be a familiar barn at Churchill Downs, they've had some success here. I was looking it up over the past year. This trainer, Troy Newton, has run 10 horses at Churchill Downs, and 7 of those 10 have finished in the money, some of them at decent prices. So I think Ironstone Road is another horse who's going to be a big price in this race that I want to use somewhere in this sequence. So I'm going for some prices in here and hoping to get lucky that one of them comes through, because I'm not thrilled with these favorites. And maybe if I rely on some favorites later on, I'll be in short of a bigger payout because of this first leg.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add about Ironstone Road is he's a horse who most of his success has come on the dirt, even though he's run on turf a couple of times. And his speed figure last time, it's an angle that I like to use when I think he's better on dirt, and yet he ran a 106 on turf last time. If you think he is better on dirt, that would make him competitive in here, and he is one that's going to be a big price.
Let's move on to the next leg of this sequence. And while it's a bigger field, Craig, I'm not sure we have to spend quite as much time on this race. It's a nominers 1 allowance going 1 mile, 1 turn mile, I should say, on the main track. And I believe, again, we haven't seen the morning line yet as we record this, but I believe we're going to see a pretty heavy favorite in here with the number 12 Milliken all the way on the outside. This just seems like a pretty talented horse who is going to get through his allowance conditions pretty quickly. The only reason he didn't win last time was because he ran into another very talented allowance competitor in Olympiad who beat him at Keeneland, but those two finished well ahead of the rest of the field, and Milliken just seems like a very talented horse for the Ian Wilkes barn that probably is going to have stakes in his future.
Yeah, he's a really good horse. I don't think I'm ready to go the route of a single yet with him, though. You obviously have to use him. He'd be an A-type for me. He's clearly, as you said, he ran very well last time out after a huge maiden debut. His speed figure regressed a little, but I think that was largely due to the pace. Olympiad had everything his own way. We have all the fractions coded in blue, and he still almost ran him down. So clearly the horse to beat, but I do want to consider Injunction a little bit. He put on blinkers last time when he broke his maiden at Keeneland, and I don't want to overlook a horse that jumped up to run a 114 TimeformUS speed figure. So he's the other one I'm going to use. Probably not as heavy as Milliken, but I do think he's a horse with some real talent.
Yeah, and Milliken, I think you make a good point about the last race, Craig. I do believe that speed figure probably could be a little bit higher. I know we've talked a lot about downgrading these slow-paced dirt sprint races for the TimeformUS speed figure compared to the final time number. Olympiad and Milliken got 1:16 and 1:15 respectively as their final time numbers. That was knocked down to a 1:09 and 1:07 due to the slow pace of the race. But when I scroll through the chart of that race, Craig, I mean, it kind of does jump out at me that another horse who was involved in the pace of that race, involved in that slow pace, Two-Lane Tryst, who finished 5th, came right back this past weekend and got a 1:12 TimeformUS speed figure, winning at Churchill Downs. So it might be a race where you want to put a little bit more stock in the final time number. And I should mention, Two-Lane Tryst is not the only horse that's come out of that allowance race who finished far behind Olympiad and Milliken and has come back to run faster in a subsequent start. So that seems like a completely legitimate race to me. And while we haven't seen the winner come back, we are seeing Milliken here. And he's just a horse that does look like he's pretty talented. He was so impressive winning his debut at Ellis Park 2 back. And of course, if you look up his pedigree, he's a half-brother to some very good horses for Whittam Thoroughbreds. McCracken, Four Graces, Bondurant, all half-siblings to this horse. So he seems like one that might turn out to be pretty good. But I agree, Craig. The other interesting alternative probably is the number 9 Injunction, who jumped up with that big speed figure last time. A son of Skipshot. I don't think we see too many horses by that sire. Himself a son of Skipaway. But this one, he did really move up last time on the slight turn back in distance. So I'm not really worried about him going back out to a mile here. We could see a faster pace with some other speed signed on, but he just seems like one that might be figuring it out, and it's always good to have Joel Rosario aboard. The one other horse that I do want to mention that I'm not putting on the same tier as Milliken, but another horse that I would want to use as a backup in this race is the number 5 Gentle Soul. I can't quite figure out why the connections have been trying to run this horse farther in his last couple starts. He was very impressive breaking his maiden at Ellis 3 back, going the 1-turn mile. He really ran away from that field late with an impressive final quarter mile, just sprinting through the stretch to beat Injunction by almost 4 lengths. And then they stretched him out to a 1.125 at Churchill. I don't know if something happened at the start, but he didn't show his customary speed that day. Then they tried to go a 1 3/16 last time at Keeneland. I don't see in this horse's physicality or his pedigree why he should want to go that far. He is a half-brother to By My Standards, who I believe is best going a flat mile. So I like Gentle Soul getting back to the 1-turn mile here.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. I just think he'd have his work cut out to close the gap, which I think you agree with between Milliken and Injunction even. The another horse for me that was similar was Flags Up. He's a horse who I think had a tough trip last time. Pretty slow pace, and he was still able to get up there. But for me, I just couldn't make the leap that he would improve enough to compete with the top 2.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page as you. I watched that Santa Cruzar race. There are actually 4 horses in here coming out of that. And while I agree that Flags Up probably ran the best of the 4 horses coming out of that race, you could look up the PPs of Santa Cruzar. He's nothing special. It just feels like that was a much weaker allowance race than this one, so I didn't really want anybody out of there. And if I was kind of sorting through these contenders, I would make Milliken the only A in this race. And I would use Injunction and Gentle Soul on the same tier, probably both as C's and an ABC kind of wager, because I do want to focus more on Milliken, but they would both be on backup tickets for me. Let's move on to the feature race in this Churchill Downs Pick 4. It is the Grade 1 Clark, race 11, going 1.125 miles on the main track. And Craig, we've got some 3-year-olds in here that are stepping up to face off against the older horses. The 2 that probably are going to take the most money bookend this field, the number 1, Midnight Bourbon, and the number 8, Maxfield. Maxfield being a 4-year-old, of course, whereas Midnight Bourbon is that 3-year-old. I think pace, though, is going to have a significant impact on the outcome of this race, because I agree with this TimeformUS pace projector, Craig. They're just supposed to go from the inside of Midnight Bourbon and try to wire the field in the same way that they did in the Travers.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to overthink this race too much. It's going to be a pretty simple one for me. Midnight Bourbon is the fastest horse on our speed figures. He looks to be loose on the lead, and for me, he's going to be the only A. He's going to be super tough to run down. I mean, as I look through the PPs, just trying to figure out who could push him if they even wanted to, and I just can't come up with anybody. So I have no idea who would even try to press him. So for me, he's going to be an A for sure. There is one other horse I'm going to use in a lesser tier, probably like a C-type horse, but it's not Maxfield. I personally have just had enough of these older horses. I think we know what they are, and I don't think they're as good as Midnight Bourbon. So the other one I'm going to use is the other 3-year-old King Fury. He's a horse who has just been getting better and better every time out. If you put a line through that turf race he tried, the Saratoga Derby. But I love this race 2 back where he won that Bourbon Trail Stakes over this Churchill Downs Oval at 1 3/16. Got a big figure, and I think last time is another race you can just put a line through. It was on a sloppy track. Independence Hall set a slow pace out on the front end, like a seriously slow pace. So much so that we gave it the pace upgrade symbol in here. And I just think he still ran all right that day. His 120 speed figure puts him right there with the older horses. And if there was one horse, if by some chance somebody challenges Midnight Bourbon or he just doesn't show up, I think King Fury's the second best horse.
Yeah, no surprise. We have a pretty similar take on this race. Midnight Bourbon, I mean, it's kind of funny. He's actually eligible for the first race that we talked about in the sequence, the 9th race, that non-winners of 2 other than allowance race, because he is just 2 for 12 in his career. He has not been winning these graded stakes races, but he's been right there in all of them, behind Hot Rod Charlie, Essential Quality, Medina Spirit, Rombauer. I mean, he's in the money behind these horses and running some really respectable speed figures in the process, and it seems like he's arguably doing better than ever now at the end of his 3-year-old season. And I do believe Midnight Bourbon is one of these 3-year-olds, kind of like, I mean, I hesitate to use this comparison because it's too obvious, but kind of like a gun runner who was not among the upper echelon of the 3-year-olds when he was in his sophomore season, but he just kind of kept getting better slowly but surely, wasn't winning the races. And the way that Midnight Bourbon's speed figures are on this upward trajectory at the end of his sophomore season, I do think he's the kind of horse that could make his presence really felt next year as a 4-year-old, and hopefully he continues to improve at this rate. But it just seems like he's found a perfect situation to finally get that grade 1 victory in this Clark. You have to think Rosario is going to be aggressive from the inside, and given the allowance weights of this race and the fact that he doesn't have those graded stakes on his resume, he gets in as the lightweight with 118 pounds, whereas Maxfield has to carry 5 pounds more than him as one of a few high weights in this race. So I just think it's another reason that Midnight Bourbon looks like he's going to be pretty tough in here. And I think he should be favored. I think he should be a substantial favorite, and he's the one that I want to lean on here as well. And Craig, we're pretty much in agreement about the rest. King Fury, I agree. He's the other horse with upside in this race. Kind of in a similar fashion to Midnight Bourbon, he does not have those graded stakes wins on his resume, but he was impressive 2 back. I agree that the pace of the Fayette last time was a legitimate excuse for the horses that were trying to close into that pace, and I think he's better than that. So King Fury, well, I'm not sure that he's quite proven he's on the same level as Midnight Bourbon right now. He is one that I would not be surprised if he took a step forward, and I just don't really want the Maxfields who I've just seen enough of. I mean, Maxfield can win this race, but he always takes a lot of money, and if he is a similar price to Midnight Bourbon, I much prefer Midnight Bourbon. And I do kind of want to get your take on the Todd Pletcher pair, Craig, of Dr. Post and Happy Saver. I guess they're the other two that could attract some support here, but I'm kind of against both of them.
Yeah, they just kind of, like I said, when you see these older horses, they just keep running the same 120 type TimeformUS speed figure. And with horse like Midnight Bourbon in here, I have a hard time believing that's good enough to win this race. So the only way I could see him is if he just doesn't show up for some reason with that pace advantage. And even if he didn't, I still would prefer King Fury, who has just run faster races already. So I'm not interested in these guys at a short price. Dr. Post, I never know what to do with him, but I wished him, I wrote him off after that race out in California where he just ran in spurts, wasn't able to beat what was a pretty weak field in the Grade 1 Pacific Classic. Didn't do anything at all to change my mind in the Woodward. He's just a horse who even a great trainer like Todd Pletcher just doesn't seem to be able to figure out.
I do want to mention just one other horse in this race, not necessarily as one that I want to use prominently in the pick 5, but if you're playing this race vertically, I would try to get night ops in there underneath, either in exactas or even the third rung of a trifecta, because if you're talking about horses in that Fayette being compromised by the slow pace, the horse that you probably should want the most is Night Ops, because he was far back the entire way behind that slow pace, actually encountered traffic on the far turn. I don't know what Florent Giroux was doing, but he wasn't moving this horse forward, and he got kind of sandwiched between runners coming to the top of the stretch, actually got shuffled back in traffic all the way to last at the top of the stretch, and then re-rallied to get back into fourth. He was never beating Independence Hall that day, but he ran just as well as King Fury, if not better than that one. And again, he's facing an unfavorable pace situation in this Clark, so I don't really view Night Ops as a likely winner of this race, but he is one that I think is in good form and the kind of horse that picks up the pieces and can be second or third. So if I was playing a trifecta here, I would be keying on Midnight Bourbon in the first spot and trying to get Night Ops somewhere underneath.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say. Just kind of depends on the odds, but he's definitely one who I think you can line through that last race, and he's just been steady all year long. He always runs races right around that 120 mark, so assuming he's going to be a bigger price, and I have no reason to think he won't, I've got no problem with that. And I'm glad you mentioned verticals, because I'm going to be playing this race for that same reason, probably just trying to get Maxfield out of the trifecta, because I don't really think he has a significant edge over anyone in here, and he's going to be probably a pretty close second choice. So that's how I will play this one vertically.
We'll close things out with the final leg of this pick four sequence, a starter allowance, 50,000 going 6.5 furlongs on the main track. And Craig, this is one where I wish that I could see a morning line just to kind of direct our discussion in some direction to begin with, because it's a wide open race. There are many places to go. I really don't know who's going to be favored in here. I guess we could start the conversation with a couple of horses that are coming off maiden victories, the number 8 Cousteau and the number 10 Extreme. I think both of these horses could be among the shorter prices, just coming off some blowout victories. I'm not thrilled with a lot of the horses that we've kind of been seeing and claiming races are at this condition, especially those that could take money in this race. There are some bigger prices I want to highlight, but I do want to give a long look to these runners that are coming out of the maiden races, because they're running just as fast as some horses that have already faced winners.
Yeah, for me, I kind of started this race with the pace projector. Excuse me. And we have it shown as a fast pace, but we also have Pirate Rick. Why don't you take over for me for a sec, Dave?
Yeah. You get a drink of water. Yeah, as you were saying, the pace projector, Pirate Rick is shown on the front end, the number 9 horse, on a pretty clear lead. We'll see if he is that much faster than everybody else. I saw this as that fast pace flag would indicate as being a pace that could get sort of competitive on the front end, because the number 4 who showed in third on the pace projector, Tango Charlie, he is just a need the lead type. He's got one way to go. He runs his best races when he's battling for the lead on the front end or when he has a clear lead. So I think that Rafael Bejarano has to be aggressive with that horse. The number 11 Mish, I don't think we know what to expect from him coming up from Florida. He is another horse though that has some tactical speed. So I could see this pace heating up towards the front end, and maybe that makes you a little bit leery of some horses that I mentioned as coming off those maiden victories, like the number 8 Cousteau and the number 10 Extreme, because both of them broke their maidens in gate-to-wire fashion, and I don't think either one of them is necessarily fast enough to make the lead here.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. What's interesting for me with Pirate Rick is he just ran on the 20th. So is he really going to come back? I'm not sure. If he does, I think it makes the race really interesting, because I think he's pretty clearly going to be the fastest horse, and I think he causes some problems for some other horses in here. It doesn't necessarily mean that I think he's going to win, because I don't. I would agree with the pace projector. So this one was a little tough for me, because I do wonder if he is going to run. But assuming he is, especially at the 6.5 furlong distance, I wanted to look for some others that might be coming off the pace. So I'll just list a couple of those. The first one is the horse drawn inside, Greener Pastures. He's a horse who, to me, is clearly better on dirt, even though the majority of his races have been on synthetic and grass. But his race 2 back, he got a hot pace early and was able to run a 106 speed figure. So I think he's a horse that would be dangerous in here. Another one that kind of caught my eye was On Your Mark. He's being ridden by Joel Rosario, and he's a horse who earlier in his career had been one who had raced up a little closer, but he's been improving lately. He's kind of adapted to a new style where he comes from off of it. And his last race was his best one in a while. He got a 104 speed figure. So if we do get that hot pace, I think he'd be pretty dangerous as well. Mish, who you mentioned, I almost have to use this horse just on the trainer change alone. I don't know who Trainal Crystal Lanham is, but we have her rated a 0 in TimeformUS, changing to the Safi Joseph barn. And even though he's at Churchill, he doesn't have the same kind of numbers he does in Florida. I mean, that has to be an upgrade. The horse ran on turf, I think, 4 out of her 7 starts. 4 out of his 7 starts, which that tells me right there the horse was maybe not put in the best spots. All the dirt races are good. He has come from off the pace a little bit last time, so I'm not going to totally dismiss him. And the other horse drawn outside is AC Expressway for Norm Cass. And he just seems to be a horse moving in the right direction. He showed up as a first-time gelding last time out, ran an improved race coming from off the pace. So again, for me, it's just kind of going to depend if Pirate Rick actually shows up in here. And if he does, I'm going to look to those closing types that I mentioned.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about the participation of Pirate Rick being somewhat in doubt. We'll see if he does run back. If Pirate Rick is scratched from this race, I will say right off the bat, I would upgrade the number 4 Tango Charlie, because he's a horse that has the races to be competitive here. The Randy Morse barn has been doing well at this Churchill meet, and he could be the one to really inherit in a controlling position if Pirate Rick comes out of this race. So I'm a little bit against Tango Charlie with Pirate Rick in the race, but I would definitely use him if that scratch comes in. Craig, we have a similar take on some others in here. I agree about the number 1 Greener Pastures. I think dirt is the right surface for him. He's supposed to get a little bit of pace to close into. I don't love the field that he beat 2 back on the dirt, but I just think that he's one that makes enough sense in here and won't be that short a price, so I would use him prominently. Another horse that I would throw into the mix is the number 2 Brew Crew. I know he's just 1 for 14 in his career, doesn't have this big winning profile, but he's first off the claim for Joe Sharp, who is a good claiming barn, especially this past year. Over the past 12 months at Churchill Downs, Joe Sharp is 4 for 11 first off the claim with an ROI of 392. And Brew Crew, I know he ran poorly last time. Watching that race, it just looked like something went wrong. James Graham really did not persevere with him that day, but he's got plenty of prior speed figures that put him in the mix. He can close a little bit off from not that far back, but he can come from a little bit off the pace, so I want to use Brew Crew. Another horse that I'm very interested in is the number 5, No K No. If you go back and watch this horse's last race at Keeneland, check out the head on of the start, because this horse just gets completely clobbered coming out of the gate. I mean, a horse literally makes a right-hand turn into him, and he just gets totally knocked off stride. So I'm willing to draw a line through that race. He was the 9-5 favorite and didn't show up, but I think the start was a huge excuse for him. And he had run a 100 TimeformUS speed figure 2 back at Saratoga prior to that. That's proven to be a strong race, because the second and third place finishers, Repo Rocks and Risk Profile, came right back to run some nice races at Belmont off of that. Repo Rocks even a good performance last week at Aqueduct. So No K No is a horse for trainer Fausto Gutierrez, who I think might be better than he looks at first glance and is worth using here. I would use the number 10 Extreme, one of those horses coming off a maiden victory. Ray Handel has good stats off the claim. I think he might have picked up a good one. This is a horse that just ran into talented maiden winner after talented maiden winner early in the year. Horses like Continuation and Cool House, and especially Cody's Wish 2 back. Horses that can run speed figures in the the 110s or above. And Extreme, he ran well in those races. Some of the top speed figures in this field. He just wasn't good enough to win those tough maiden special weights, and he was an easy winner last time at Keeneland, and I think if he gets back to his prior speed figures off the claim, he arguably is the horse to beat in here. So I would use Extreme. I don't know what to do with a horse like Mish, the number 11. He looks appealing at first glance for all the reasons you highlight, Craig. The trainer switch. Safi Joseph he's got decent numbers off trainer switches. He's better off the claim than he is with trainer switches. Obviously, the low percentage statistics for the prior barn make you believe this horse is going to take a big step forward. I'm just skeptical of how good this horse is. That speed figure 2 back at Gulfstream Park, if you go back and look at the chart of that race, the number is kind of an outlier for the winner. I wonder if those Gulfstream horses are really as strong as what he's facing here. So I'm a little bit less enthusiastic about him, but what I'm getting at is, if I'm right in that first leg, the 9th race, where I'm going for a long shot, I don't want to get knocked out here by stupidly leaving out some logical horses. So I would just want to spread as much as possible because I went pretty thinly in the preceding 2 legs.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm going to cast a very wide net in here after being pretty narrow in the 2 before, going 1 or 2 deep, depending on, how many A's and B's, whatever the ticket maker tells me, that's probably what I'll do. But yeah, I just think there's a lot of directions you can go. And again, it kind of is going to come down to me which ones I really like, depending on whether Pirate Rick goes or not, because I do think he's the key to the race. He's a quick horse. You had mentioned Tulane Twist earlier. That's who he ran against and was pressing for the early lead. Cool Quest, who you also mentioned, was in that race. So it was a strong race, and I don't think he's any slouch. I just wonder if he's really going to show up in the entry box I guess it would be 6 days later, 7 days later.
Yeah, Craig, it's just a pick 4 sequence, but I think it's pretty fascinating. There are different ways to attack it. And, I just think the one thing that we've kind of been hammering home over and over again, but I'll just state it plainly at the end, is you don't want to do the obvious thing where you lean heavily on a ledge, you lean heavily on the horse in the second leg, whose name is escaping me now, the number 12 horse Milliken. You lean on Maxfield and Midnight Bourbon and then cast a wide net in the last race, because that's what everyone's going to be doing. So if you want to try to go for a bigger payout and kind of go a little bit against the grain, zig where others are zagging, maybe you want to try to go for a bigger price in the first leg, or try to, as Craig was saying, use that second or third choice injunction in the second leg, maybe on the same tier as Milliken, or try to go for a big price in this last leg, highlight some of those horses rather than, making the shorter prices your A's and the long shots your B's and C's. Maybe mix it up a little bit, because that's how you're going to get paid playing these pick 4 sequences.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And I mean, if for the people who are a little more ambitious, they could always add in the 8th race, play a pick 5. That was a race I wasn't particularly interested in, and I was glad you suggested a pick 4, but that option is still out there. But I do think this is a pretty good sequence with some potential if you can get prices. And like you say, I think that's the way you want to play it. You don't want to play too many tickets that if you hit, they're going to come back to pay $150, $200, even $300, unless you were just really playing a short ticket. So to do that, you need to use some prices in the first and last leg.
Well, I don't think we stand to get the kind of payout that we did at Aqueduct last week with this pick 4, but you never know. Hopefully we gave out some good opinions handicapping this sequence for Friday, November 26th at Churchill Downs. Craig, as I said, we're not going to do a TimeformUS forecast later in the week. That's kind of what we did here as we record this on Tuesday, but we will be back next week to recap some of these races. There will be plenty of graded stakes racing taking place across the country this Thanksgiving weekend. The Clark on Friday. I know there are plenty of graded stakes at Aqueduct, Del Mar, more at Churchill. So we'll talk about all of that when we do the TimeformUS Pacecast next week. Craig, I know that you have a vacation coming up pretty soon, a little bit later in December, but I believe I'll have you for at least another week and a half or so. So we'll have a couple podcasts coming at you next week.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be around. For that Cigar Mile, and I think it's a Remsen and Demoiselle. So after that, things slow down a little bit anyway. So probably wouldn't be a lot to talk about, and I'm sure you'll be able to handle it without me. But yeah, it's always look forward to doing these shows, and I was almost tempted to do them while I'm on vacation, but I don't think our boss would like that very much. And yeah, I could probably use the break. So yeah, I'll be here for the next few weeks.
No, we could all use a break from the nonstop action every so often. So I'm glad that you're taking some time, and everyone's going to get a little bit of a break this week, hopefully, I believe, as people celebrate Thanksgiving. So want to wish everybody out there a happy holiday, and we'll reconnect on the other side of it next week. So thanks for tuning in this week. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. As I said, thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll be back for the TimeformUS Pacecast a week from now.